I stood at the window, watching as the car backed out of the driveway, turned right, and vanished down the street. Strangely, I felt almost nothing. 10 years of marriage had just driven away, yet the flood of emotion I'd anticipated didn't come. Shouldn't I have felt heartache, anger, or even relief? Instead, I shrugged and muttered, "Guess it's time to fix that leaky faucet." Heading toward the kitchen, my mind replayed the events from earlier. When I arrived home after work, Isabella was already there, seated at the kitchen table with a full glass of wine in front of her. That alone was unusual. She rarely beat me home. Her schedule typically had her arriving at least half an hour after me. On top of that, we had a quiet understanding. The first one home started dinner, and there wasn't even a pan on the stove. Then there was the wine. Isabella hardly ever drank. As I stepped into the room, her expression told me something was up. Before I could say anything, she gestured for me to sit. She had something to share. Grabbing a beer from the fridge, I took the chair across from her and waited. "Chase," she started, her voice measured, "I know you've noticed things haven't been right between us. For 6 months, maybe longer, it feels like we've been drifting apart. I don't know what's causing it, whether it's me, you, or something else entirely, but I can't ignore it anymore." She paused as if trying to find the right words. "I've tried bringing it up before, but every time you brush it off. You say it's just a rough patch and that things will improve. But I've realized I need space, a break, a separation. I think we both need time apart to figure out what's next. Not a divorce, just time." I stared at her, stunned. "Come on, Bella. It's not as bad as you're making it sound. Every marriage has rough patches. You don't fix things by running away or refusing to talk about it." "Talking won't solve this," she replied, her tone calm but firm. "You think our only issue is that we're not intimate anymore, that if I just give in, everything will be fine. But it's more than that. I don't want to be touched. I don't even feel like cuddling. And I don't know why. It's not that I've stopped loving you. I do love you, Chase, as much as the day we got married. But something shifted, and I need time to figure it out." "So, you're just walking away? Throwing away 10 years? Her expression softened. "I'm not throwing anything away. I just think this is what we need right now. I've packed a few things, and I'm going to stay with my sister Mary for now. I'll check in once a week." And just like that, she stood, said she had to go, and left. No hug, no kiss goodbye. That absence of affection stung more than anything else. It didn't take long for word to spread about our separation. Friends rallied around me, offering their sympathy and trying to keep my spirits up. Isabella kept her promise to call weekly, though our conversations were brief. She'd ask how I was doing. I'd respond that I was managing. Then I'd ask if she was ready to come home, and her answer never changed. Not yet. After 6 weeks, rumors started swirling. Whispers about Isabella living with another man began to reach me. At first, I dismissed them. I wanted to believe she simply needed time to sort things out. But the rumors didn't go away, and my doubt grew. I tried asking around, hoping to learn where she was staying, but no one seemed willing or able to tell me. The more I probed, the more suspicious I became. One evening over dinner with my friends Jordan and Ashley, I finally voiced my concerns. I mentioned that I was considering hiring a private investigator to get some answers. That's when I caught the exchange of uneasy glances between them. "Don't bother wasting your money," Jordan finally said, hesitating. "The rumors are true. Most of us already knew, but we didn't want to hurt you." My stomach sank. "What are you saying? Hurt me how?" Jordan looked uncomfortable but pressed on. "Isabella's been staying with Caleb Green." "Who?" I asked, completely baffled. "I've never heard of him." "He works with her," Jordan explained. I sat there, stunned. "She left me for this guy? Why go through all the pretense of a separation? Why not just file for divorce?" "You know Isabella," Jordan said cautiously. "She always has a plan. My guess is she wanted to keep her options open, something to fall back on if things with Caleb didn't work out." I stared at him, trying to process his words. "And you all knew? Everyone? And no one thought to tell me?" The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. Standing abruptly, I tossed my napkin onto the table. "Thanks for the heads up, Jordan. Really appreciate it." Without waiting for a response, I walked out of their house, feeling more betrayed than I ever thought possible. Driving home, my thoughts raced, consumed by the truth I'd just uncovered. Isabella hadn't wanted to share any intimacy with me for over a year. No physical connection, no cuddling. Because deep down, she didn't want me to touch her. And yet, all that time, she had been carrying on an affair. I had been the dutiful, clueless husband, waiting for her to come back while my so-called friends stayed silent, fully aware of what was going on. They let me sit in the dark, believing things would somehow improve. Well, those days of waiting were over. The next morning, I booked an appointment with Corliss Investigative Agency, handed over a retainer, and gave them everything I knew about Isabella and Caleb Green. Their workplace, details about their routines. I wanted a complete dossier on them both. Once I got home, I began drafting a list of everything I needed to do to cut ties with Isabella permanently. I wasn't going to act until I had the investigators' report, but I was determined to be ready. As I reviewed my list, another thought crept into my mind. It had been nearly 16 months since I'd been with anyone. Between Isabella's rejection and the separation, I'd been left high and dry for far too long. I had remained loyal, even during this time apart. But now that I knew what she'd been up to, there was no way I was staying celibate any longer. Sitting at the kitchen table with a beer in hand, I began plotting ways to put an end to my long, dry spell. As my mind wandered, something Jordan had said came back to me. Isabella always has a plan. After all these years, I knew it was true. She probably had backup strategies for everything, including how to handle me once I discovered the truth. Was someone keeping tabs on me, reporting my every move? Maybe she was waiting for me to make a mistake, something she could use to her advantage in a divorce. The thought left me unsettled. My carefully made list suddenly felt useless. Isabella might have already anticipated every step I was planning to take. Realizing I needed a fresh approach, I began drafting a new strategy. This time, I focused on actions I could take immediately, steps that would catch her off guard. Some moves would have to wait, but others needed to happen now. As I reviewed my plans, a sly smile crossed my face. I wondered if Isabella had ever anticipated something like this. The next day, I stopped by the bank to deposit my paycheck. While I was there, I decided to check the log for the safe deposit box Isabella and I shared. To my surprise, she had been visiting the box at least once a week. It was clear she was keeping a close eye on its contents, likely waiting for any hint that I'd caught on to her. I thought it over and decided to act. I removed the 5 certificates of deposit, CDs, stored in the box, took them upstairs to the bank's copier, and made copies. The originals went back into their envelopes and into the box, indistinguishable unless Isabella inspected them closely. Before leaving, I retrieved my passport as well. Casually, I mentioned to the clerk that I was planning a fishing trip to Mexico. With the CDs tucked securely in my pocket, I walked out of the bank feeling a step ahead. Over the next few weeks, I maintained my routine, visiting the bank twice a week. Each time, I cashed in one of the CDs, willingly paying the early withdrawal penalty, and stashed the cash at home. I had always preferred dealing in cash and avoided credit cards as much as possible. Isabella, however, was a different story. She had several credit cards with sky-high limits, and I knew exactly what those limits were because I paid the bills every month. I made note of her balances and decided I'd only pay the minimums moving forward, just enough to keep the accounts active. With my financial strategy in place, I turned my attention to something else, getting what I wanted before walking away from this marriage. Over the next several weeks, I went on a calculated spending spree using Isabella's credit cards. If I was going to leave this relationship, I intended to make sure she was left holding the debt. I upgraded my home office with a brand new Dell computer loaded with the latest features. I snagged a Remington 700 from eBay along with a slew of other gadgets, a digital camera, a cutting-edge cell phone, and a few other high-end purchases. By the time I was done, I had everything I wanted and more. The house technically belonged to Isabella. It had been passed down to her by her parents, so I had no legal claim to it. However, we'd used the property as collateral for a line of credit when we installed the pool and hot tub. Both of our names were on the account, and though the balance was paid off, the credit line was still open. If I timed it just right, I could withdraw funds before Isabella caught on. As I considered this, it became clear why she insisted on a trial separation and left me in her house instead of asking me to leave. By staying, I'd appear hopeful, like I believed she was coming back, which reinforced her illusion that the separation wasn't permanent. Next, I decided to cash out my $400,000 savings, willingly taking the penalty and secured the funds in a safe place. All that remained was waiting for the private investigator's report. Still, one issue gnawed at me: how to end my dry spell. After 16 months of no intimacy, I wasn't about to continue this imposed celibacy. Yet, if Isabella had someone tailing me, I couldn't risk being caught seeing another woman. That's when an idea struck: weekend fishing trips. Isabella knew my passion for fishing, and I often brought back enough to make the pretense convincing. It was unlikely she'd waste resources tracking such a mundane activity, especially since I'd been naive enough to trust her for over a year. On a Friday afternoon, just as I was preparing to leave work, I got a call from Ashley. She insisted I stop by her house on my way home. I tried to decline, but she pressed, saying it was important. Reluctantly, I agreed. When I arrived, Ashley met me at the door and led me into the living room. Jordan was there, seated in his usual spot. He stood, extended his hand, and we exchanged a brief shake. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, then added, "I'll grab you a beer." As he walked toward the kitchen, he glanced back and remarked, "Ashley needs to talk to you, Chase. Just know that I'm fully on board with whatever she's about to say." His words left me puzzled, and I looked to Ashley for clarification. She simply smiled and said, "You'll want that beer before we get into this." Jordan returned with a Bud Light, handed it to me, and casually announced, "I've got some errands to run, won't be back until midnight. See you later." With that, the front door closed behind him, leaving Ashley and me alone. She didn't waste time. "Chase, I know you were hurt the night you left after dinner. You had every right to be. We should have been upfront with you from the beginning. We were friends with both you and Isabella, and we hoped she'd realize her mistake and come back to you. We thought it'd be easier for you to move forward without knowing about the affair. That was a mistake, and for that, I'm sorry." She paused, giving me a chance to respond, but I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. "That's only part of why I asked you to come by," she added. "We know what kind of man you are, loyal, faithful. You'd never cheat on Isabella. But let me ask you something. How long has it been since you've been with someone?" Her question caught me off guard. For the first time, I noticed how she was dressed. Her low-cut blouse revealed more than I was used to seeing, and her short skirt and high heels accentuated her toned legs. I felt a reaction stir, and suddenly, Jordan's earlier comment about being on board started to make sense. In a quiet voice, I replied, "A year and a half." Ashley leaned in closer, her voice soft but deliberate. "I'd like to change that, Chase." I shifted in my seat, uneasy. "Jordan's my friend, Ashley. I can't do that to him." Before I could rise, she grabbed my arm, holding me in place. "Jordan is fine with this, Chase. That's why he left, to give us privacy. This isn't about pity or some spur-of-the-moment decision. We've talked about this for months. There's something you can give us, and in return, I can help you." Her cryptic words confused me. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "To put it simply," she said, "Jordan is sterile. We want a child, and we want you to be the father." I stared at her, speechless, trying to comprehend what she'd just said. Finally, I found my voice. "You just said you knew I'd never cheat on Isabella." Ashley's hand rested gently on my arm as she spoke. "Chase, your vows were built on trust, and now you know Isabella broke that trust. You're not bound by something she's already destroyed." "Why me?" I asked, still trying to make sense of her words. "We trust you," she said simply. "We don't want a stranger or some anonymous donor. We want someone who will always be part of the child's life, someone we can count on. You'd be their godfather, Uncle Chase. You'd always be involved." "This still feels strange," I muttered, struggling to process what she was suggesting. "It's the best choice for us," Ashley said earnestly. "If something ever happened to Jordan or me, who better to raise our child than someone we know and trust? And if the child ever needed help, something like a medical donation, we couldn't count on an anonymous donor to be there. We've thought about every possibility, and we're certain this is the right path for us." She leaned in closer, her voice calm but direct. "And don't tell me you don't find me attractive," she added, her tone teasing but serious. "We can help each other here, Chase. It's been a long time for you, hasn't it?" Her words hung in the air, and I found myself hesitating. It had been so long since I'd felt wanted. Seeing her confidence, the look in her eyes, I felt my resistance fading. "Come on," she said with a soft smile. "Let's make this happen." In the bedroom, everything moved naturally, our actions fueled by an undeniable chemistry. Afterward, she rested with a pillow under her hips, her focus still on their plan. "This might take some time, Chase," she said, smiling warmly, "but I'd love for us to try again before you go." As I left her house that evening, she kissed me on the cheek and added softly, "This is just the beginning. Let's take it one step at a time." Driving home, my thoughts raced. The events of the evening replayed in my mind, but then a concern surfaced. If Isabella had hired someone to keep tabs on me, wouldn't my visits to Jordan and Ashley's house raise suspicions? She might notice Jordan leaving while I stayed behind. The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. The next morning, I called Ashley to share my worries. She reassured me with a light laugh. "Don't overthink it, Chase," she said. "Jordan didn't leave the house. He just went to his workshop in the basement. No one would notice a thing." Her explanation gave me pause. It was one thing to spend time with Ashley when Jordan wasn't around, but knowing he was still in the house made it feel different. Sensing my hesitation, she quickly added, "It's fine. Trust me, Chase. Everything is okay." Later that day, Jordan called and invited me out for a drink. Sitting across from him, I couldn't shake the discomfort I felt. Here was a man I'd called a friend for 20 years, and now our relationship had shifted in ways I never could have imagined. It seemed like he could sense my unease because he got straight to the point. "I know this situation is strange for you, Chase," Jordan began, his voice steady. "Honestly, it's strange for me too. But we need to talk about everything that's happening. First off, I meant it when I said I'm okay with this. I really am." He paused, his tone becoming more serious. "But Ashley didn't tell you the whole story. Yes, we want a child, and yes, I'm sterile. But there's more to it. To put it plainly, I've been unable to be physically intimate with Ashley for over a year." His words hit me hard, answering a lot of questions I hadn't dared to ask. It explained Ashley's enthusiasm the night before. Her comment about not giving Jordan sloppy seconds was her way of protecting his dignity. She didn't want me to know about his condition, likely to shield him from embarrassment. And I respected that. It struck me how different Ashley was from Isabella. Even in this difficult situation, Ashley's priority was Jordan's feelings, whereas Isabella had always prioritized herself. "I don't know if it fully registered last night," Jordan continued, "but Ashley has a strong need for physical connection. My condition has been tough on her, and she's done her best to hold things together. But Chase, if we hadn't found a solution, I know she would have eventually sought that connection elsewhere. I'm not saying it to blame her, it's just the truth. She loves me, but if she started acting differently, I would know. How could I not? And if it happened behind my back, I wouldn't be able to handle the dishonesty. That would break me. The only way to prevent that was to address it openly." Jordan took a sip of his drink, gathering his thoughts. But Ashley isn't someone who could just see strangers or maintain a secret double life. That's not who she is. We needed someone steady, someone we both trust. He looked me directly in the eye. "We talked about it for a long time, Chase. We even made a list of people, but no one felt right. You were the only person we both agreed on. Still, we hesitated because if Isabella came back, we were afraid it would complicate things. And Isabella will come back to you," Jordan added. "Everyone who knows Caleb Green knows what kind of guy he is. Isabella will realize it eventually and come back, assuming you're still waiting for her. For some reason, she thinks you're too trusting to figure out what she's been up to." I chuckled at that. She wasn't entirely wrong. If the separation hadn't dragged on, I might never have uncovered the truth myself. Jordan leaned forward, his voice firm. "But now you do know, and I know you're done with her. That's why Ashley and I felt we could approach you. We want a child, Chase, and Ashley needs the closeness she's been missing. Until doctors can figure out what's wrong with me, we want you to help us. I know it sounds unusual, but this is the only way to save our marriage. You just need to get comfortable with the fact that I know, and I'm okay with it." I didn't respond immediately, needing a moment to let it all sink in. Finally, I nodded, though the entire situation still felt surreal. That Sunday, I hosted a barbecue at my house with Jordan, Ashley, and a few other couples. After the guests left, Jordan excused himself to the den, leaving Ashley and me alone. Upstairs in my room, Ashley and I shared an intimate moment, though she still kept things lighthearted. She grinned as I told her to prop a pillow under her hips, laughing at my insistence on letting gravity lend a hand. "Bella walked away from this?" she teased. "She must be crazy." Her words boosted my confidence. By the time we were done, we both agreed the day had been a success. Later, as I walked Jordan and Ashley to their car, we all casually remarked about how great the barbecue had been, keeping up appearances for anyone who might be watching. The following Monday afternoon, I met with Eric Watts at Corliss Investigative Agency. He handed me the report with a sympathetic expression. "I'm sorry, Chase. Every time I do one of these, I hope it's just a misunderstanding, but there's no doubt in this case. Your fee includes our testimony if it's needed in court." I thanked him, shook his hand, and left the office feeling surprisingly calm. By that point, I'd already accepted the truth about Isabella's betrayal. The report was simply confirmation of what I already knew. There was little left to do but finalize my plans. I would time my withdrawal from the house's line of credit carefully, ensuring Isabella didn't notice until it was too late. After that, I'd meet with a lawyer to draft the divorce papers, though I wouldn't serve them until everything was ready. Dear listeners, we hope you're enjoying this story and the many others on our channel. If you like our content, we'd be delighted if you subscribe to our channel. For you, it's just a small click, but for us, it means the world and helps us create even more captivating stories. Thank you for being part of our journey. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rest of the story. For the next 5 weeks, I spent time with Jordan and Ashley 3 or 4 times a week, either at their house or mine. They spread the word that I was going through a rough patch and that they were just keeping me company to lift my spirits. Meanwhile, Isabella kept up her weekly calls, but I'd stopped asking how she was or when she planned to come home. Eventually, I reached my limit. I wrote checks against the open line of credit, waited for them to clear, and then found an apartment. Once I'd moved out, I had Isabella served with divorce papers, citing irreconcilable differences rather than adultery. I wanted to keep her guessing about what I knew. I figured she'd see the filing as a push to make her decide, perhaps thinking I wanted her to come back. I expected her next move almost to the letter. First came the phone call, with Isabella claiming I was overreacting, and that there was no need to involve attorneys. I kept my response simple, telling her, "You don't want to be with me, and I need to move on with my life." We agreed to meet at Angelo's for dinner. It was the first time I'd seen her since she'd left, and I couldn't help but notice how good she looked. I felt a pang of sadness, realizing I still cared for her, but I also knew there was no going back. Isabella launched into her explanation. She'd been seeing a therapist who was helping her work through her feelings. She assured me she was making progress, but needed more time. "I know this is hard on you, but it's hard on me too," she said. "Please just give me a little more time." I told her I'd think about it and let her know. 2 days later, I instructed my lawyer to withdraw the divorce filing. Isabella called me at work that afternoon, her voice full of relief. She thanked me, promising I wouldn't regret the decision. I smiled, knowing I wouldn't, but for reasons she didn't yet understand. That evening, I went to Jordan and Ashley's for dinner. Afterward, Ashley and I spent time alone. As we lay together, she smiled up at me and said, "Can we make love tonight? Not just, I want to make love to the father of my child." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," she replied. "The home test came back positive on Tuesday, and the doctor confirmed it this afternoon. You're going to be a daddy." We only made love once that night, but it was unhurried and meaningful. Afterward, I told her it might be a while before we could see each other again. "I'm wrapping things up with Isabella and Green this week. I might need to leave town for a while." "Don't do anything drastic," she said softly. "I'm going to need the father of my baby around." "That would be Jordan, sweetheart," I reminded her. "You need to start thinking of it that way." She laughed lightly. "You know what I mean, Chase. Just because I'm pregnant doesn't mean I won't still need you." Caleb Green, a member of the Fraternal Order of Eagles, never missed a meeting, especially after being elected Sergeant-at-Arms. After one meeting, he was in high spirits, thinking about his chances of advancing in the organization. That mood didn't last long. As he returned to his condo, he was struck by a sudden attack that left him unconscious. A neighbor found him and called 911. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, where doctors discovered extensive injuries. His arms and legs were broken, and he had sustained severe trauma to his groin. The damage was so critical that surgical intervention was necessary. When Green regained consciousness, he was in unbearable pain, unable to move, with casts on all 4 limbs. Isabella was standing at his bedside, her face pale with shock, but he blacked out again before saying anything. I wasn't there, but I heard what happened next. A man entered the hospital room, approached Isabella, and asked if she was Isabella Perry. When she confirmed, he handed her an envelope, informing her that she'd been served. Confused, Isabella opened the papers to find she was being sued for divorce, this time citing infidelity as the grounds, her eyes fixed on the word infidelity, and then her gaze shifted to Caleb's battered form in the hospital bed. Realization dawned, her face turning pale as tears began to fall. She sank into a chair and murmured, "Oh my God," over and over. I stayed in town just long enough to answer the police's questions about my whereabouts the night Caleb Green was attacked. Fortunately, I had a rock-solid alibi. I was at a poker game that started an hour before the Eagles meeting and lasted well into the night, long after Green had been admitted to the hospital. Unintentionally, Bella had provided that alibi. The guys at the game would have vouched for me without hesitation, but I decided to make a point by using her credit cards as a form of ironic gratitude. The home shopping network charged her Visa for digital cameras, which I gifted to Austin and Tyler. Mason got a laptop from eBay, courtesy of her MasterCard, and Kyle received a 19-inch flat-screen monitor. Oh, and the aluminum bat? That was on her dime too. With 6 weeks of vacation and 3 weeks of comp time saved up, I took the opportunity for a 2-month leave. After the police were satisfied that I had no provable connection to Green's unfortunate situation, I started planning a fishing trip to Mexico. Before leaving, I instructed my attorney to hold off on pushing the divorce case. The strategy was simple. Let Bella initiate a fight over it. Until then, we'd stay technically married, but I would have no contact with her. While I was away, I stayed in touch with Jordan and Ashley to keep tabs on things. They told me Bella had moved back into the house, a clear sign that her relationship with Green had fallen apart. She hadn't been to see him since the day she was served, while standing by his hospital bed. I imagined the chaos that must have followed when she started receiving the maxed-out credit card bills. Then came the realization that the savings and checking accounts were empty. The line of credit was maxed, and even the CDs in the deposit box were worthless. Not long after, I heard she was frantically trying to find me, but nobody could tell her where I'd gone. Her desperation led her to call my boss, who played along with her assumptions. He hinted, without outright saying it, that I had quit abruptly and left town. When that didn't work, she reached out to my attorney, demanding a meeting. She was informed that I had dropped the divorce case, paid off my attorney, and no longer had legal representation. With no options left, Bella eventually filed for bankruptcy. She lost the house, had to give up her Lexus, and was left driving a used Geo. Once I heard that Bella's life had fallen apart, I returned from Mexico and found an apartment on the opposite side of town. I carefully avoided places where I might run into her. Meanwhile, Ashley, who was 5 months pregnant and looking more radiant than ever, re-entered my life. We picked up where we had left off, enjoying our time together without having to worry about prying eyes. A few nights each week, we alternated between staying at her place or mine. 2 months after I got back, Bella finally tracked me down. One evening after work, I found her waiting in the parking lot. She stepped out of her car and started walking toward me, but I ignored her, got into my car, and drove off. I deliberately kept my speed slow enough for her to follow, leading her to Bud's Bar and Grill. By the time she parked and came inside, I was already seated at the bar with a cold drink in hand. She stormed over, her expression brimming with anger. "You think you can just avoid me forever?" she snapped. I anticipated her move and turned just in time to catch her wrist as she raised it to hit me. Squeezing it firmly, I lowered my voice, ensuring she understood my words. "Bella, I've got every reason to be angry with you, but don't push me. Keep your hands to yourself unless you want this to get worse." Releasing her wrist, I saw her wince as she shook it. "I wasn't avoiding you," I said calmly. "I slowed down so you could follow me here. I'm not going to let you air your grievances in front of my coworkers, but here, everyone already knows the kind of person you are." "I need to talk to you," she demanded, her tone sharp. "I'm not interested in talking. I've heard enough lies already." "I want my money back," she said firmly. I raised an eyebrow and chuckled. "What money, Bella?" "The money you took from the house and the accounts. Half of it belongs to me." Leaning back, I laughed softly. "You're not getting a cent. Call it compensation for what you put me through. Pain, suffering, the humiliation of being the last to know while everyone else did. Think of it as a repayment for all the nights I spent alone while you were out with someone else." Her face flushed with anger. "You cost me my parents' house." "That house didn't seem to mean much to you when you moved out to be with another man," I countered, Her voice shook with frustration. "I'm serious, Chase. I want that money." I met her gaze, my tone unwavering. "Here's the reality. You're not getting anything from me. You tried to play me, and you lost. It's over. Accept it." Her parting words were bitter and defiant. "We'll see what the courts have to say about that." "It doesn't matter what the courts decide, Bella," I said with a calm but firm tone. "Here's how this will go. You'll need to hire a lawyer and file for divorce just to get me into court. Once that happens, the court will issue an order to divide our assets. Then, I'll countersue. A good attorney can drag that process out for 6 to 8 months, and during that time, you'll be the one footing the legal bills. Can you afford that? Meanwhile, I've got all the evidence I need to fight back. If I win, you'll be left with nothing." I leaned forward slightly, my voice steady. "The worst case for me? A judge orders me to split the assets. I'd agree on paper, but you'd be waiting for the money, and it wouldn't come. You'd call, but I wouldn't answer. Your lawyer, still billing you, would have to go back to court to force me to pay. Even then, the money wouldn't show up. You'd return to court, get a judgment, but it would mean nothing. I have no savings or checking accounts to attach. My car? It's a lease. My apartment? Fully furnished, nothing for you to seize." I let the silence hang for a moment, then added, "Your only option left? Garnish my wages, but the second my paycheck is touched, I'll quit my job. What does that leave you with? A year's worth of legal fees for maybe a few $100s from a single paycheck." Bella's face tightened with frustration, but I wasn't finished. "And if you think a judge would threaten me with jail for contempt, all that would accomplish is getting you a postcard from a quiet fishing village in Mexico. I could live comfortably there for quite a while, thanks to you." I let the words sink in before delivering the final blow. "Face it, Bella. You thought you could play me, but it didn't work out. Consider yourself fortunate. Think about Caleb. He paid a far steeper price. Now he won't be hurting anyone else, but you. You're free to live your life however you choose." Her eyes flashed with anger. "I knew it. I knew you had something to do with what happened to Caleb." I smirked. "What you think and what you can prove are two entirely different things, Bella. By the way, how's your love life? From what I hear, you haven't been to see Caleb since his first day in the hospital." "What would be the point?" she snapped. "You ruined the one thing he had going for him." "That's cold, even for you," I replied. "It's just the truth," she shot back. "He was gifted, sure, but I would have tired of him eventually and come back home." I laughed bitterly. "Well, Bella, if only I'd known. All of this trouble could have been avoided. What a shame I ruined it by evening the score. I guess I'll just have to live with that regret." "You're a real jerk," she hissed. "And you're a selfish, unfaithful liar," I replied, standing up and finishing my drink. I gave her one final look. "Have a miserable life, Bella," I said before walking out of the bar. 3 days later, I was served with the divorce papers citing irreconcilable differences. I didn't contest them, and the court awarded her half of the marital assets, along with the funds I'd taken out against the line of credit. I didn't fight the judgment. I knew she'd never see a dime. I tossed the final decree in the trash. It seemed she believed me when I laid out how things would play out, as I never heard from her again. One interesting consequence came from the fallout. Caleb Green had a reputation, but even he had friends, and one of them happened to be Bella's boss. He wasn't pleased with how she abandoned Green after his ordeal, and not long after, she was let go. The official reason was downsizing, but everyone knew the truth. Unable to find work locally, Bella eventually moved to California to stay with relatives. Since then, no one, not even her sister, has heard from her. But the story didn't end there. While much of it was sad, it also marked the start of a new chapter. Ashley gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, and Jordan adored her, spoiling her whenever he could. I became Uncle Chase, spending hours with little Brianna. Jordan never shared the full story, but eventually I learned the truth. He knew why he struggled with his health. It was cancer, and by the time it was diagnosed, it was too late. After Jordan's funeral, Ashley handed me an envelope addressed to me, the words, "For Chase's eyes only," written on the front. She shrugged, her eyes full of curiosity. "I don't know what's in it," she said. "It's for you." I opened the envelope and read the letter inside. It said, "Hey buddy, if you're reading this, I'm gone. There's something you need to know. It wasn't Ashley who picked you. It was me. I knew I wouldn't be around, and I needed someone I could trust to take care of my girls. I knew you were the one. Don't let me down. Take care of them. I handed the letter to Ashley, and she read it, tears streaming down her cheeks. I pulled her into my arms and held her while she cried. When she finally calmed down, she looked up at me and asked softly, "What are you going to do?" I smiled at her. Exactly what Jordan knew I'd do. I'm going to take care of my girls. 6 months later, Ashley and I were married. Thank you for watching and hope to see you soon. Have a great day.